turrets, battlements, a castle. We've come to the Middle Ages and the time of chivalry. Now the world is becoming smaller. Artists are travelling around and meeting one another. And we're beginning to have what's called, rather pompously, an international style. The very rich hours of the Duke of Berry, a suitably luxurious title for the sunniest Middle Ages ever painted. Gentry play, happy peasants toil. It's the rich man's view, and that's what the Duke of Berry was. After 1,000 years, non-religious themes in art have reappeared, and the Limbourg brothers paint the Duke's property, castles, lands and peasants to liven up his prayer book. The only castle painted by the Limbourgs which survives today is Saumur in the Loire Valley. What do we see when we look at this enchanting picture? Well, what the Duke of Berry saw was a page from the most splendid manuscript ever owned by a royal prince. And one can imagine him in a broad iron church looking at these magnificent pictures. This is the month of August from the calendar at the beginning of the book. And it's a miraculous picture because it gives the Duke just what he wants. There's the castle, one of his 17 castles, all pearly and gleaming in the light. And here are the courtiers on their splendid horses, perhaps the Duke himself on that white horse, out hawking in all the glory of their attire. But because the Limbourgs are great artists, they don't just give the Duke what he wants. They give what they actually saw. And they saw those fields and the river and the peasants swimming, mother naked, unembarrassed, frolicking in the water. So in the front, the courtiers, those living, apparently, the good life. This is August, remember, very hot. They're clothed to the neck in rich, tight clothes. I mean, look at the women's waists. They're on these horses following a game, right, hawking, but it's the rules of the game. And even those sort of canoodling in the back, there are rules for exchanging love looks. So it's a very constricted life, a life being looked at, whereas the peasants, they're free. They're happy. Which is better off, the Limbourgs might have been asking. Now, it's this double level that I find so marvellous, and all the Limbourgs do. And my favourite painting, I think, is this one, February. Because at first you just see it's comic. Here is the lady of the house, the peasant lady, warming her underpants before the fire, modestly averting her gaze from the men of the house, who are warming their lack of underpants before the fire. And it's this ability truly to look without fixed ideas of what is fitting that makes great painting. The Middle Ages was actually a dreadful time of war and disease. Plague probably killed the Limbourgs and the Duke of Berry, while in England the first poll tax caused a peasant rebellion. King Richard II survived this, only to be deposed and imprisoned. The Wilton diptych, today guarded by the National Gallery, was painted for him by a forgotten artist, perhaps his last comfort in that dark dungeon. At first sight, it's perfectly conventional. But when you take a second look, you realise that everybody in this picture is either pointing towards or looking at the least significant figure, young King Richard II, except for rather that dim angel at the back that hasn't sort of quite got the idea. And the idea is a political idea. Because Richard was a disastrous king, poor lamb. He was handsome and brave, but he never kind of made it. He hadn't the charism that makes a leader. And all his life he had a struggle against the rejection by his people. For one thing, he didn't want to fight the French, which greatly upset the English. And at the end, shortly after this was painted, he was deposed and died in suspicious circumstances. So you can see what he wants here. He wants to convince himself, and this became the kind of linchpin of his kingship, that it didn't matter what people thought. All that mattered was what heaven thought. You couldn't unking a king. You were born such. And he's showing all the powers of heaven are on his side. There's even that rather vulgar touch, that the angels are actually wearing his badge of the White Hart. If you think of them as wearing little Union Jacks, you'll see how really very low class that is. But it comforted him. And you can imagine poor Richard, rejected and depressed, propping this icon up as he knelt to say his prayers, and remembering that even if his people didn't love him, the powers of heaven did. In the story so far, we've spanned centuries and continents. But in the next programme, our story becomes focused through one man. His name is Giotto.